Okay, so it is honey harvest day. Yesterday I went out to the hives and I got off about 4 boxes of finished honey. So then I transferred some unfinished honey around in the hive so that they could finish it, so that they could eat off of it, so I could feed some of the other hives that still need some assistance. But this is my uncapping tank. And I also use this for transport from the hives because I didn't have the truck and it was a lot easier to keep the bees out of this. I only brought back about 7 bees from this entire box this time. This is the upper uncapping tank and it holds all of my frames while the honey is dripping off of them. Right now I've just got them set in here upright because I had to transfer them from this tank because of using it for transport. Something I did do a little bit different, I doubled the amount of drainage holes that I have in the bottom of this, and everything drains off of what I'm cutting from the wax, and any honey attached to that wax drips down. So this is my frame board, and I hold the frame on here. There's a screw sticking up there in the middle, and I spin it around. The trouble I was having in the previous years that this board was wanting to move around a bit, so I picked up some stainless steel screws, and this box already had 2 rectangle holes here on the side. I had to widen them just a little bit, and now I have this anchored in so that's not going to slide out of place for me. I think I might add more anchor points on the side of the box here. I really didn't want to do too much to it. I didn't want to weaken or damage the integrity of the box by changing things because of the way it latches on, and I want to keep it as bee proof as possible for taking it out there. But a viewer gave me that idea. Thanks for that. I probably used it for another year after that. I did a spring harvest with honey that was left on the hive from the winter and remembered that I needed to do that. So I stopped by Menards and I picked up some stainless machine screws and wing nuts. Then all I had to do was take a marker and stick it up here through this hole, line it up on here. I just used a 1/4 inch drill bit and now I'm all set and it's not going to slide around. So I'll go over my honey equipment with you real quick. This is a double strainer, and after I extract the honey through my extractor, it all drains off of this valve into the bucket sitting on the floor. Now most of the wax collects in this top strainer, and this one is much finer and it collects any very tiny parts. Sometimes you get little bee parts or very small pieces of wax. And then down into here, I will tell you, you do need to let your honey set for 24 hours or longer to get the air bubbles out of it, especially when you're doing clear containers. I like to store it in the basement in mason jars, and then when we have the honey sales, transfer it to the plastic containers. It just makes things a lot easier for me, storage-wise, to use the mason jars up, because if I have 10 of these filled up, and somebody wants 4 of these, then I don't have to empty it out, wash it, and have to, you know, accommodate for whatever packaging I have. You can also leave them stored in 5-gallon buckets, but do not store them with these honey gates on. These are honey gates that I picked up on Amazon and eBay, and you can pick up several of these at once instead of buying this from the bee manufacturer. This bucket with the lid and the honey gate is, I think, $30. These buckets run about $5 to $7 with a lid, and the honey gates anywhere from, you know, $2 to $25 depending on if you're just doing eBay from China or from a supplier. So just kind of shop around. I think I put everything together, ordered in advance, and ordered maybe 5 of these that came overseas from China. That was fine for me because I wasn't in a hurry. It does show on there that it's food grade. So if you are using the plastics, you do want to make sure of that. And when you're using it, you want to make sure that this wing nut, that the screw on the back is pushed in all the way, because that can give you trouble and then drip. And that's why you don't store it in these. This gasket right here, if it has a lot of honey or dried honey built up on there, you want to make sure that that stays clean. That will prevent a good seal on your honey gate. So just keep that in mind. And it might not be a bad idea to keep something underneath this just to make sure that you're not getting a honey flood when you're not looking. So same thing with this. You can see the screw is backed out a little bit, so I'm going to grab something to tighten that up. So this is my honey extractor, and this is a 3-frame extractor. It will do 6 smalls or shallows. It'll do 3 mediums or 3 deeps. So we just load that up and start cranking. This is manual. I did not want to have a motorized one starting out, and this was the hard start to getting into the beekeeping, because these could run up to, you know, $300 to $500 for a starter one. And this one just happened to have come up on Craigslist. Watch my old videos of my start of my honey equipment. The guy threw in a couple of supers for me to get started, a couple other things, and I think I gave him maybe $200, $250. So I was super excited about that. I added my stand later on and had it in the kitchen. I noticed that it was wanting to walk a lot when I was using it in the kitchen, so I added roller wheels that lock in place. That didn't really help any, because I really have to hug the entire drum as it's spinning to hold it in place. On top of that, it might be a better thing to bolt it to the ground. We just haven't gotten ourselves situated in our garage with a permanent space. This whole area tends to be our processing area whenever we do any honey stuff. We've got the cider press tucked back there and the meat saw tucked back there, and it just kind of tends to become a landing surface for lots of stuff. So this is how the uncapping tank sits, all stacked up. These are, I believe, the Acro Mills tanks, and I built this myself. There's a video on my honey playlist about doing this, and you can see I added my own honey gate to it. All I had to do was separately order these. I ordered a lid for it for transport and for storage, just to make sure that flies and bugs and stuff don't get into it as it's sitting out here draining, and I usually let it sit and drain for a day or two. They do make cappings spinners, but they are very, very expensive. I just found this way works well for me, and it's a good, inexpensive, do-it-yourself thing. Okay, so I have spun the hack out of the first side of these, so now you have to flip them over. They have a different style for much more money. I think it's called radial extractor. From what I understand, the way it works is you don't have to flip them, you just reverse the direction of the spinning. And there's a bonus of doing honey. You get a little taste the entire time. And this is a lot of clover honey from earlier this summer. I always keep a warm, wet rag around and clean up any drips and wipe your hands as you go. So that's real nice, fresh wax. When you're done, you put these back in the beehive, and the bees will clean up any leftover honey that is on them. What's Mama doing? Combine? Yeah. Now I spin this for a lot longer than what's probably necessary, but I want as much honey out of these frames as possible. Now each individual frame is about 6 pounds when it's loaded, kind of depending on how much they've drawn out the wax. Sometimes they draw it out beyond the face of the frame. Other times they don't quite complete it and it's a little shallow. So you've got to have a couple different tools for uncapping. I have an uncapping fork, and that puts a lot of wax into the honey that has to be filtered out. And then I have an uncapping knife. Now I don't use a heated uncapping knife because of the cost and expense of it. I don't have to do this in a huge production, and I can quit at any time. But to help out cutting the wax off, I keep a cake pan here with hot water in it. And you don't want to get water in your honey, so you just wipe it off, and then you can turn around, open up about 3 frames all at once, And you can uncap them here and let them set in the tank and drip a little bit, but then it's dripping on top of the cappings that you've already cut. So I found I don't like to cut too many ahead because that's more filtering to happen later. This is the uncapping fork or scratcher, and like I said, this leaves a lot of wax in your finished honey that's got to get filtered out. So putting that through here, it can clog it. This year I decided I needed to get a second one of these, and on eBay and on Amazon, you know, maybe $20 depending on where you can get it or how fast you need it. So you just open up your honey gate in between frames and loading and let that drip out. And then you can put these finished frames in a tote or back on your hive boxes and give it back to the bees. There's a lot of food still on here for them to eat. And then when it's all done, you want to take these back out, stick them in the freezer until you're ready to use them. That makes sure that there's nothing on these pest-wise. You don't want to spread diseases and stuff from hive to hive. That's so good. Oh, it's tasty, all right. So this is what I was saying. Sometimes they draw the wax out beyond the side of the frame. You can see most of that I'll be able to cut off. If they, on this side, didn't do the same, it's not going to cut off with the offset knife. So then you have to use the capping scratcher. So make sure you at least have those two tools to get started. See, that frame was just too shallow to cut anything. Also, as I'm working with this uncapping tank, I tend to let my wax fall in different areas so that I don't have to really spread it out later on. And I find it's better to let any uncapped wax drain from this tank than from my main filters, and then separate this off later. So the thing I found with the kids helping me with this, they like to scratch really deep and destroy the comb. That also is going to slow your filtering. Now generally with a foundation frame, they'll do a good job of drawing out the wax over the entire frame. On this particular one, they did a real weird job, and I had a bit of trouble with a few of the frames when I was taking them out, being fused together. They drew the wax between two combs connecting each other from one frame to the next. And I hadn't seen that quite before. There was some comb that they had raised it out, and there was bees between the honey and the frame, so that was a real pain in the butt. But see that? The big shallow spot right in the center. Now this frame was already drawn wax that was taken from another hive and given to them. That's why it's a little darker. The more the bees travel on it, the darker the wax gets. So usually it kind of cuts off pretty easily. If it starts slowing down, I'll wipe this real good and I'll put it in the hot water again. But generally you can get more than 3 frames uncapped before it starts to get difficult to do. But without the heat, your thumb starts getting wore out from pushing down on the side of that knife. Always sticky between every single load. Get this ready, cleaned off for the next pass. Back in the hot water. I'm just going to go ahead and put this on fast forward for you, and you can watch me do some more honey extracting. Now you don't have to spin yours out as long as I am. Like I said, I'm just trying to get as much honey as possible. I've got a lot of frames to do, so it can be slow. There are other versions of this. This is a Man Lake honey extractor, 3 frame. So you can do, well, they call it a 3-6 frame because obviously 3 mediums, 3 deeps, or 6 shallows. They sell these at some farm and home stores are selling these right at the store. Tractor Supply is selling stuff online. Family Farm and Home, there's a couple of those in Michigan nearby us. There's a Rural King several miles away from us, and I never get over there, but you can shop online and you can get this sent to you. They do have a different version that will crank on the side, and it's a much smoother, easier turning deal. I didn't choose that because I wasn't buying new. I bought it used, and it was great for what I needed starting out. Sometimes you just got to get what you can and get going.
All right, we are at the end of extracting our honey. I've actually got about 10 more frames to finish. My bucket's got plenty full. Honey is much heavier than water, so keep that in mind when you're filtering, because it might be a good idea to run 2 bottling buckets at the same time. I filter right into my bottling bucket because this is about 3/4 full and it's plenty heavy. So I like to do my bottling right in the kitchen. That way I have access to water for sticky fingers, for accidents, and then I can keep a close eye on it while the kids are doing their things. Now, like I mentioned, I like to bottle into mason jars for storage. Glass storage is about one of the best things that you can store your maple syrup or your honey in, because you do have some oxygen leaching with plastics. You want your bottled product to stay at the level quality as when you bottled it. Look at that nice honey. This is our 8-ounce container. We've got a 1 pound, a 2 pound, and a 3-ounce bottle. We used to always just ship them in the mason jars, and we found the post office was having a hard time getting deliveries sent on time and intact because they tend to throw them at porches or throw them around in shipping centers. So we switched to the plastic. That way you're getting your honey by weight instead of by volume. And it just makes it a lot easier for packaging. Here's the 1 pound jar. I'll show you these side by side in comparison once I got just a couple of them filled up. We've got some orders that are ready to get sent out, so we're filling up some shipping bottles right now. £2. There's a lot of different size containers that you can get for this, the honey bears and bee scaps. This is called their queen line jar. I got these through the Man Lake. You saw the unboxing video for that during the live stream a couple of months ago, so if you haven't, go back and check that out. And here is a 3 pound. Now anytime you're bottling with new containers, you want to find out where the fill line is for the volume of jar or container that you're filling to make sure that you're not shorting anybody or selling too much honey in the opposite case. So I'm going to switch over to my mason jars and you can see up close my bottling. You always want to make sure that your bucket of honey sets for a day or two to let all the air bubbles rise out of it before you start bottling. If you don't do that, you get a layer of bubbles and foam at the top of every single jar. This way it all sits at the top of this bucket, and then whatever's left after bottling, that last bit that's foamy, I just put aside, instead of selling that one, put it aside for cooking. Now so far we've got about 8 gallons of honey to bottle, with still a few more frames to go. So it was a really good year for the honey. You always want to make sure you don't take too much off so that the bees have enough to make it through winter. In the case that you might have to feed your bees, it's best to give them honey instead of sugar or sugar water. In the wintertime, if you have to feed the bees, you can make a fondant. Sugar patties work really good for feeding them. Grease patties with sugar in them are really good for other ailments like tracheomites. So if you're a beekeeper, this is the time of year that you start reading to get ready for next year. Learn from your mistakes. Talk with other beekeepers. Read your books and go online and get all geared up for next year. We ended up ending this year with 8 beehives. 2 of the splits weren't as successful. They were a little weak. We lost the queen at the one late and didn't know it. So we just combined that beehive with the existing hive that it was originally split from. Now if you're wondering, a quart mason jar is 3 pounds. So we wanted to stick with close to the same size containers we were already selling to keep the pricing in line. You can go right on our Etsy link on our channel page if you want to order any honey. We still have maple syrup available also. And I can generally get it shipped out in 2 to 3 days. We always do the USPS priority shipping, so it usually takes another 2 to 3 days to get it to you depending on your location. All of our honey is filtered through just the common filter. There's 2 layers of it, and that takes out any little bits of beeswax. Sometimes you might get a crushed bee or anything, and it'll filter that out. We don't heat it and process it in any way. It's non-pasteurized. This is raw organic honey. Now that it's slowing down a little bit, I can show you the inside of the bucket. All this white foam is just air bubbles that have risen to the top. If you can faintly see this little line here, very, very fine particles from the wax cappings can get in there, and that all stays on that top layer. So that is it for our honey harvest for this year, everybody. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.